In the quiet town of Brentwood, secrets lurked beneath the surface, threatening to unravel the lives of those who held them. When Mark and Valerie's hidden affairs spiraled out of control, one fateful night of rage turned passion into murder. As the walls closed in around them, they faced a terrifying choice: expose their dark truths or bury them forever, even if it meant living with the chilling weight of a life lost. We're a passionate team of four dedicated to bringing you the most gripping true crime stories. Your support means the world to us. Subscribe, like, and share our channel to stay updated on our latest investigations. It was a quiet, wealthy neighborhood in the heart of Vermont, where everyone knew each other and everything seemed normal. But beneath the surface of this peaceful town, a dark secret was hidden, one that would change the lives of two respected people: Mark and Valerie Spencer. To the outside world, they seemed like the perfect couple. They were well respected, had two lovely daughters, and appeared to have a happy marriage. But behind the closed doors of their beautiful home, things were very different. Betrayal, jealousy, and unfaithfulness were growing. This web of lies would soon lead to a violent situation no one expected. One cold November night, a man's body was found in a remote cabin. As the investigation went on, a shocking story of obsession, dangerous secrets, and a broken marriage came to light. This is the story of how love and betrayal set off a chain of events that no one could stop. Before we get into it, don't forget to like this video and let us know in the comments which country you're from. Vermont in the fall was a beautiful sight: golden and red leaves covering the neatly kept lawns and stone paths. In this perfect setting, Mark and Valerie Spencer were seen as role models in their community. Mark, 45, was the respected principal of the town's high school. He was a charismatic leader who had made the school a top place for learning. Valerie, 40, ran a successful nonprofit that helped children in need. Together, they seemed like they had it all: success, love, and stability. Mark and Valerie had two daughters, Emma and Grace, both teenagers trying to find their way in life, sheltered by the protective home their parents had created. From the outside, the Spencer family looked like the perfect picture of happiness. They hosted fancy fundraisers, attended community events, and were often seen holding hands at town gatherings. But even the best-built appearances can't hide the cracks beneath. Behind the doors of their big suburban home, things were different. Their marriage, once full of life and passion, had become dull. The love they once shared was now replaced by routine, duty, and worst of all, distance. Valerie often felt lonely, spending long hours at her office or traveling for charity events, while Mark was buried in his work at the school. The spark that had once brought them together had faded, leaving both of them wanting more. For Mark, this longing for excitement came in the form of a younger woman, Lisa Coleman. Lisa, a 30-year-old school counselor, was smart, energetic, and everything Valerie no longer seemed to be. At first, Mark's attraction to Lisa seemed harmless, just small flirtations and long conversations after school. But it soon grew into something much more dangerous. Tired of the boring routine at home, Mark felt a rush of excitement whenever Lisa gave him attention. He was like a moth drawn to a flame, unable to resist. Meanwhile, Valerie had her own secret: Nicholas Wright. Nicholas Wright, a 60-year-old board member of Valerie's nonprofit, had been a constant presence in her life for years. At first, their relationship was purely professional, but as Valerie felt more and more neglected by Mark, Nicholas's charm and attention became impossible to ignore. He gave her what Mark no longer did: admiration, desire, and a way to escape her boring life. While Mark and Valerie continued to appear as a united couple in public, their hidden affairs were bubbling beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to explode. Mark couldn't remember exactly when his innocent exchanges with Lisa had crossed the line into something more. It started with harmless conversations in the hallways, light touches that lingered a bit too long, and meetings that felt more personal than professional. Soon these interactions became the highlight of Mark's day. He found excuses to be around Lisa, enjoying her laughter and the sparkle in her eyes when they talked. She was young, lively, and full of energy, everything Valerie used to be, but no longer was. As the weeks passed, Mark and Lisa's meetings became more frequent. Their first kiss happened after a late-night school event when Mark drove Lisa home. In the darkness of his car, their built-up desire finally spilled over. From then on, it was like a dam had burst. Their meetings turned into secret encounters, often in empty classrooms after school hours or in out-of-town hotels when Mark could find a reason to be away from home. What Mark didn't know was that Valerie was already involved in her own secret affair. Nicholas Wright wasn't just any man. He carried himself with confidence and had a powerful presence that drew attention. Valerie had always admired his ambition and success. He showered her with the kind of attention and desire she hadn't felt from Mark in years. At first, her relationship with Nicholas was simply an escape from her dull marriage, but soon, their meetings became more intimate. Valerie found herself in an emotional and physical affair she hadn't expected. Nicholas wasn't just a distraction anymore. He had become a necessity in her life. He was older, experienced, and brought excitement that made her feel alive again. Valerie sometimes fantasized about leaving Mark for Nicholas, but something always stopped her. Maybe it was the security Mark provided, or the worry of what people, especially their daughters in the community, would think. For now, she kept the affair a secret. Both Mark and Valerie were so caught up in their own affairs that they didn't notice the growing cracks in their marriage. They were living on borrowed time, unaware that their secrets were about to collide in a disastrous way. It was only a matter of time before the balancing act they had been performing started to fall apart. The first sign of trouble came with paranoia. Mark's relationship with Lisa had grown intense, and she started asking for more. More time, more commitment, and more of him. Mark became increasingly distracted, making excuses to leave home, lying to Valerie about late-night meetings and weekend conferences that didn't exist. Every time Lisa called or texted, his heart raced with both excitement and fear, the fear that Valerie would find out and his carefully built life would come crashing down. Meanwhile, Valerie's affair with Nicholas was becoming more complicated. Nicholas, once the calm and composed older man, had started showing signs of jealousy. He became more possessive and demanding, pushing Valerie to leave Mark and be with him completely. But Valerie wasn't sure if she was ready for that. The excitement of the affair had faded, replaced by the harsh reality of Nicholas's growing demands. She felt trapped between the life she had built and the life she had dreamed about. The tension between Mark and Valerie was growing. They barely spoke anymore, only talking when necessary, about their daughters or upcoming social events. Valerie sensed that something wasn't right with Mark. His frequent absences, his distracted behavior, and the way he seemed to avoid touching her raised alarms. But she didn't confront him. She had her own secrets to protect. One night during a particularly tense and silent dinner, Valerie's suspicions started to solidify. Mark's phone buzzed on the table, and she noticed how quickly he glanced at it before shoving it into his pocket. Her stomach turned with unease. Later that night, after Mark had fallen asleep, Valerie sneaked into the bathroom with his phone. She unlocked it using the passcode she had memorized months ago. What she found shattered any remaining illusions she had about their marriage. The messages between Mark and Lisa were explicit, revealing a passionate affair. Valerie's mind raced as she pieced together all the lies, late nights, sudden business trips. It all made sense now. The anger bubbling inside her was almost unbearable, but she kept it in check. She had her own secrets, and any sudden reaction could expose them. So she decided to wait. Meanwhile, Mark had started to grow suspicious of Valerie too. He noticed her frequent absences, her distracted behavior, and how distant she seemed even when they were together. One evening, while Valerie was working late, Mark decided to check her email. What he found confirmed his worst fears. Valerie was involved with someone else. The email exchanges between Valerie and Nicholas were far from professional. They were filled with suggestive language and details about their secret meetings. For the first time in years, Mark felt the sharp sting of betrayal. He had justified his own affair by convincing himself that Valerie no longer loved him. But now he realized she had been playing the same game all along. The knowledge that Valerie had been unfaithful ignited a dangerous mix of jealousy, anger, and wounded pride inside Mark. The cabin sat deep in the woods, far away from the eyes of society. It had been a place of secrecy, where Mark and Valerie had both let their hidden desires come to life. For months they lived double lives, indulging in secret affairs while still appearing as the perfect couple in their picturesque town. But things were starting to fall apart, and their lies were unraveling. Mark's obsession with Lisa had grown intense. What had started as innocent flirting quickly turned into a passionate affair. Their stolen moments together, sometimes in cheap motels or secluded parking lots after school, reignited something in Mark that he hadn't felt in years. Lisa awakened a part of him that had been buried in the routine of his marriage. He was living two lives, but as Lisa's demands for more time and commitment increased, so did Mark's desperation. Valerie's affair with Nicholas was equally dangerous, but in a different way. At first, the relationship gave her a sense of control, a secret she could use to cope with her unhappiness in her marriage. But Nicholas's charm started to fade, and he became possessive. He was frustrated with her hesitation to leave Mark and start a new life with him. Nicholas, being older and wealthier, was used to getting what he wanted, and his patience was running thin. What Nicholas wanted was control. Valerie felt drawn to his authority, but also pushed away by how he tried to dominate every part of her life. Both Mark and Valerie were spiraling, caught in the pull of their affairs. They had been careful for months to maintain their suburban image, but cracks were starting to appear. Their once dull marriage had become a tinderbox of resentment, betrayal, and jealousy. Mark began to notice something was off with Valerie. She was often absent, making excuses about work trips and long meetings. He saw the late-night phone calls, the rushed conversations, and how distracted she seemed even when she was home. One night, while Valerie was out working, Mark decided to go through her things. He found an old phone hidden in her desk drawer, a separate device she used to communicate with Nicholas. The explicit messages between Valerie and Nicholas made Mark's blood boil. For him, this discovery felt like a gut punch. While the affair with Lisa had been exciting and a distraction from his unhappiness, finding out about Valerie's betrayal was something entirely different. It wasn't just that she had lied to him. It was the depth of her deceit that shocked him. Mark's feelings of jealousy and rage grew stronger every day. Soon, it wasn't just Nicholas that Mark hated. He began to despise Valerie for her betrayal. He became obsessed with finding out how far her affair with Nicholas had gone, how long it had been happening, and what plans they might have for the future. The thought of Valerie leaving him for Nicholas was unthinkable. Meanwhile, Valerie felt trapped. Nicholas had become increasingly unstable, sending her demanding texts, telling her to leave Mark and be with him. He grew aggressive and almost threatening. What had once excited Valerie about Nicholas's dominance now felt dangerous. He was no longer satisfied with their secret meetings. He wanted Valerie full-time, and his jealousy of Mark turned sinister. As Valerie became more distant, Mark's affair with Lisa grew more volatile. Lisa was tired of their late-night meetings and secrecy. She wanted a future with Mark that didn't involve hiding and lying. She pushed him to make a choice. Either he left Valerie or their relationship would end. But leaving Valerie wasn't an option for Mark. His whole identity was tied to his family, his respected position as principal, and the image of a devoted husband. The fear of losing everything was too great, but he also couldn't bear the thought of losing Lisa. Pressure mounted. And both Mark and Valerie were heading toward a collision neither could foresee. The town of Brentwood had always been sheltered from scandals. Its residents were used to the quiet rhythm of suburban life until rumors about the Spencers began to swirl. The first whispers came from Lisa's colleagues at school, who noticed how often Mark spent time alone with her. Lisa had begun confiding in a friend about her frustrations with Mark's unwillingness to leave his wife, and the gossip spread like wildfire. Valerie was no stranger to small-town gossip. Nicholas, with his high-profile role on the board of her nonprofit, was always a topic of interest. His growing possessiveness over Valerie didn't go unnoticed. They had become careless, meeting at restaurants and attending conferences together. People started talking, and Valerie felt the walls closing in. It wasn't just the gossip that threatened to expose them. The digital age made keeping secrets nearly impossible. One evening, Valerie received an anonymous email with a subject line that sent chills down her spine. "I know what you've been doing." Inside were grainy but unmistakable photos of her and Nicholas embracing outside a hotel. Panic set in. She didn't know who had sent the email or what they wanted, but the message was clear. Her secret was out. Mark's affair was also close to being exposed. Lisa had become increasingly impatient, sending him angry texts when he couldn't meet her demands. She threatened to go public if he didn't leave Valerie. The thrill of their affair had turned dangerous, and Mark was losing control. One afternoon, Lisa appeared unannounced at his office, upset and crying. She threatened to tell everything. Desperate to keep things under wraps, Mark promised he would leave Valerie soon, though he had no intention of doing so. The tension in their home became unbearable. Mark and Valerie barely spoke, each consumed by guilt and paranoia. When they did talk, it was tense and short. Their daughters, Emma and Grace, noticed the change in atmosphere, but were too young to understand what was happening. They saw the long silences, missed family dinners, and forced smiles at public events. The family that had once been the envy of the community was crumbling, and no one knew how to stop it. Valerie constantly felt anxious. Nicholas's demands for her to leave Mark grew stronger, and his once charming demeanor turned darker. He sent her erratic messages at all hours, accusing her of lying and threatening to expose her affair if she didn't comply. Yet Valerie couldn't bring herself to leave Mark. She didn't love him anymore, but their lives were too intertwined. Their daughters, their home, their reputation in the community. The thought of destroying all of that was too overwhelming. Mark, on the other hand, was consumed by thoughts of revenge. Now that he knew about Nicholas, he wanted nothing more than to confront him and make him pay for what he had done. However, he also realized that doing so would expose his own affair. The idea of losing Lisa was unbearable, but losing everything else, his family, his career, the respect of his peers, felt even worse. He felt trapped in a cage of his own making, with the walls closing in. On the night of November 15th, the sky was dark, heavy with the promise of snow. Mark had followed Valerie to Nicholas's cabin, a remote hideaway deep in the woods. He had discovered the location weeks earlier after finding a note Valerie had carelessly left in her purse. It took all his willpower to keep his rage in check as he waited for the right moment to confront them. When Valerie arrived at the cabin, she was already on edge. Nicholas had been more unstable than usual, sending her a flood of texts that went from pleading to threatening. She wasn't sure what to expect when she saw him, but she knew she couldn't keep pretending much longer. Something had to give. Inside the cabin, Nicholas was pacing, and when he saw Valerie, his mood had darkened. He greeted her with a cold stare, and the tension in the air was thick as he demanded to know why she hadn't left Mark yet. Valerie tried to calm him and explain that it wasn't that simple, but Nicholas wasn't in the mood to listen. He accused her of playing him for a fool, of using him to escape her boring marriage without ever intending to follow through on her promises. Frustrated, Valerie shouted back in self-defense, but her words only fueled Nicholas's anger. He grabbed her by the arm with a grip that was both tight and painful, and Valerie felt a surge of fear. This was no longer the charming man she had fallen for. This was someone dangerous. At that moment, Mark burst through the door, his face twisted with rage. He had been standing outside listening to their argument, and something inside him snapped. Seeing Nicholas manhandle Valerie was the last straw. Without thinking, Mark lunged at Nicholas, and the two men began grappling violently in the dimly lit cabin. Valerie screamed, trying to pull them apart, but the fight quickly escalated. In the chaos, Mark grabbed a fire poker from beside the hearth and swung it at Nicholas. The blow landed with a sickening thud, and Nicholas crumpled to the floor, blood pooling around his head. Silence fell over the room, broken only by Valerie's ragged breathing. No one moved. Mark stood frozen, staring at Nicholas's lifeless body as the reality of what he had just done slowly sank in. Valerie was in shock, her mind racing as she tried to process the situation. She had come to end things with Nicholas, but now he was dead, and her husband stood over him with the murder weapon in his hand. Panic set in as the gravity of the moment hit them both. Mark dropped the fire poker, his hand shaking. Valerie's mind raced frantically to devise a plan. They couldn't go to the police. Too much was at stake, and both their affairs would come to light, destroying their lives. They had no choice but to cover up the crime together. They cleaned up the scene as best they could, wiping down surfaces and removing any trace of their presence. Mark dragged Nicholas's body outside, wrapping it in a tarp and loading it into the back of his truck. As the snow began to fall, it covered their tracks, hiding their actions as they drove to a nearby lake in the dead of night. They dumped the body, watching as it sank beneath the icy water. Back at the cabin, Valerie destroyed any evidence of their relationship. She deleted all texts and emails from Nicholas, burning the letters he had written her in the fireplace. Meanwhile, Mark disposed of the fire poker, throwing it into the lake with the body. They returned home in silence, the weight of their crime heavy between them. Neither spoke about that night, as if they had made an unspoken pact never to mention it again. But guilt simmered beneath the surface, ready to bubble over at any moment. Days turned into weeks, and the town of Brentwood buzzed with rumors about Nicholas's sudden disappearance. His colleagues at the nonprofit reported him missing, prompting the police to launch an investigation. Mark and Valerie did their best to carry on with their lives. As if nothing had happened, Mark and Valerie tried to go on with their lives, but the strain was starting to show. Mark became paranoid, constantly looking over his shoulder, fearing the police would come knocking at any moment. Valerie, on the other hand, was consumed with guilt, unable to stop thinking about Nicholas and how their affair had led to his death. The stress took a toll on both of them, and their once perfect marriage began to crumble. Detective Rachel Monroe was assigned to investigate Nicholas's disappearance. A seasoned investigator known for solving tough cases, she quickly sensed there was more to the story. Nicholas had no history of running away, and there seemed to be no reason for him to disappear without a trace. Something didn't add up. Monroe started interviewing Nicholas's colleagues and acquaintances, soon discovering his affair with Valerie Spencer. This led her to Mark, and it didn't take long to uncover his affair with Lisa. The web of infidelity began to unravel, and Monroe knew she was onto something. However, without a body, she had no proof of foul play. She dug deeper, following the digital trail left by Nicholas's relationships. Monroe obtained warrants for the Spencers' phones and computers, and the findings confirmed her suspicions. Both Mark and Valerie were hiding something. The forensic team analyzed their communications and built a timeline. Texts between Nicholas and Valerie revealed a relationship fraught with tension, while Valerie's sparse messages to Mark suggested a growing divide fueled by their secrets. The turning point came when Monroe discovered surveillance footage from a gas station near Nicholas's cabin on the night he disappeared. The footage showed Mark's truck leaving the area in the early hours of the morning, with a large object covered by a tarp in the back. This evidence was enough to bring Mark in for questioning. At first, Mark maintained his innocence, claiming he had been driving to clear his head after an argument with Valerie. But Monroe pressed him on the inconsistencies in his story, and the pressure began to wear him down. Soon, cracks appeared in his carefully crafted alibi. Monroe also brought Valerie in for questioning. Unlike Mark, she appeared more composed, but there was a fragility to her demeanor that Monroe recognized. She knew if she pushed hard enough, Valerie would break, and she did. In a moment of pain, Valerie confessed everything. The affair with Nicholas, the night at the cabin, and how Mark had killed Nicholas in a fit of rage. She insisted it had been an accident and that Mark hadn't meant to kill him. With Valerie's confession and the surveillance footage linking Mark to the crime, Monroe had enough to arrest him. Mark was charged with second-degree murder, and although Valerie was initially seen as a witness, she was later charged with accessory to murder and conspiracy. The trial became a media sensation. The once revered Spencers were now subjects of public scorn and fascination. The prosecution painted a picture of a couple consumed by greed, lust, and jealousy, leading to murder. Mark's defense argued he acted in self-defense, claiming Nicholas had threatened Valerie, and Mark only acted to protect her. However, the forensic evidence told a different story. The angle of the blow that killed Nicholas, the blood spatter patterns, and the absence of defensive wounds on Mark pointed to a calculated act of violence. Meanwhile, Valerie pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She testified against Mark, detailing the events that led to Nicholas's death. Her testimony was damning, swaying the jury with its emotional weight. In the end, Mark was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Valerie received a 10-year sentence for her role in the cover-up. This story delves into the complex themes of infidelity, deceit, and the moral dilemmas that arise when individuals betray the trust of those closest to them. One of the key lessons is the emotional fallout that comes from infidelity. Both Mark and Valerie become consumed by guilt, jealousy, and anger, which ultimately deteriorates their marriage and affects their family life. Their secret affairs highlight the risks involved, not just to their relationships, but to their personal lives, as their hidden lives begin to unravel, leading to devastating consequences. Additionally, the narrative explores the moral ambiguity of their actions. Both characters justify their affairs due to dissatisfaction in their marriage, presenting a moral quandary about the choices people make when faced with emotional discontent. The complexity of human relationships is evident, as individuals are driven by their desires, fears, and insecurities, often leading to decisions with irreversible repercussions. The dangers of secrets play a significant role, showing how deceit can escalate into tragedy. The initial thrill of their affairs gives way to a darker reality, leading to a violent confrontation that underscores how unresolved emotions can result in devastating outcomes. This tragedy serves as a stark reminder of the serious implications of personal decisions, emphasizing the legal and ethical ramifications that follow. Psychologically, the story illustrates how jealousy and possessiveness can destroy relationships, while the burden of guilt leads both Mark and Valerie into paranoia and mental anguish. Ultimately, the narrative encourages viewers to reflect on the importance of communication and trust in relationships. By exploring these themes, the story serves as a cautionary tale about the complexities of human relationships, inviting audiences to consider the heavy price that can come from living a life filled with secrets and lies.